It's the real news. I'm Aaron Mate. Moon Jae-in has claimed a landslide victory in the South Korean presidential election. His win ends a decade of conservative government and comes months after the impeachment of Park Geun-hye. The vote could be a watershed moment. Moon favors engagement with North Korea and has vowed to tackle income inequality and high unemployment. Suki Kim is an author and journalist. She joins me now. Suki, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi, so from what we've seen, turnout in this election was the highest in South Korea in 20 years. What do you think explains that, and how significant do you think this result is?
It comes in the heels of the former president, Park Geun-hye, who was impeached last December and then removed from office in March. And that happened as a result of 5 months of nonstop protest. Actually, the main protest that actually brought that about was about 45 days of nonstop, millions of people coming out into the streets of Seoul. So with that much, I guess, passion in some sense and outrage toward the last regime, really, administration that was so corrupt, there is this overwhelming excitement for his reign, and he's the opposite of the former president in every way.
So what kinds of reforms are people expecting from Moon after this huge protest movement, as you say, ousted Park Geun-hye, sorry?
Moon Jae-in is, when I say the opposite, it couldn't be any more different. He's a human rights attorney. He's the left party. He was also jailed by her father, literally. Her father was a former dictator president, Park Chung-hee. And Moon Jae-in, the current newly elected president, was actually jailed opposing that government. So what he represents for people is sort of this, he's going to stand up to the elite, and he's going to also be more engaging with North Korea. He's gonna stand up to Chaebol, which is the big companies like Samsung and Hyundai, which dominate Korean economy. He's going to take corruption out of those big corporations. These are his promises. So there is definitely hope and excitement for what will happen now.
Yeah, so you mentioned these big family-dominated corporations that are such a critical part of the South Korean economy. Can you explain a bit more about what is behind the discontent towards them? I know they played a pretty major role in the corruption scandal involving Park Geun-hye.
Right now, Park Geun-hye is in jail, waiting for her trial to begin. So is the head of Samsung. So there is a sense in people, he's in jail because he was trying to influence government policies in favor of Samsung by bribing the government. So that is something that kind of very deep-rooted corruption was always in South Korean politics. And, the forefront of that is really Park Geun-hye's father, who ruled South Korea from about 1961, 62 to he died in 79. So, that sort of fundamental corruption is what Moon Jae-in currently is promising. The platform on which he won the election, the sweeping victory, is that his promise to the nation is that he is going to root out that sort of corruption.
Okay, now let's talk about the role of the U.S. in this election. Of course, right now we have high tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. And right before the vote, the U.S. activated the THAAD, this missile system inside South Korea. And you wrote a really interesting piece for Foreign Policy. It was called "South Korea is More Worried About Donald Trump Than Kim Jong-un." What did you mean by that?
Well, we've seen rapid negativity coming from the United States towards South Korea. Of course, North Korea too, but sort of separately in the last month of April, which began with Trump declaring South Korea having been a former Chinese colony, which is incorrect, which is very dismissive towards Koreans. It's a sort of thing Koreans won't forget. It's a major faux pas. And following that was, of course, he suddenly decided that South Korea should pay $1 billion for Assad, which the United States government had already agreed to pay for. And then was also he threatened to end the free trade agreement with South Korea and end the alliance. So I think each of these threats just came so suddenly, unexpected, in days before the election. There is definitely a sense where South Korea, which is an American ally, is suddenly America is not trustworthy. And also, it's very disruptive and incredibly disrespectful to another country's election time. With like about a week to go, Trump keeps saying these things that are suddenly shaking the entire country. So that is definitely hurting the relationship. And of course, the preemptive strikes against North Korea is a completely, in a way, separate thing. Because South Korea is dealing with its own issue, internal domestic issues, and having to deal with American threats constantly. And in a parallel way, there's a fight with North Korea. And these two are not melding. Used to be a triangular relationship where South Korea and North Korea and United States is kind of one problem, but not in this new American administration. So I think that there's definitely a sense we know what Moon Jae-in is going to do with North Korea because his policy is almost miraculously similar to a former president, Roh Moo-hyun, who was very, very, very positive towards North Korea Sunshine Policy, which is a policy of engagement. And Moon Jae-in, the new president-elect, basically worked for. He was the chief of staff for Roh Moo-hyun. So he pretty much has the same policy. So we know what to expect. What we don't know is really what is going to happen between Moon Jae-in and Trump. Because Moon Jae-in is a guy who's promising to people he's going to stand up to a big bully, like a big corporation. Right now, the bully is also the United States. So then how is he going to stand up to the United States and yet at the same time have enough of a positive diplomatic relation? Because obviously South Korea has to get along with with the United States, which Moon Jae-in said he's going to try, but it's kind of difficult to promise to stand up to the bully while getting along with that bully. And that is kind of what Moon Jae-in has to do.
I also imagine it's a challenge for Moon Jae-in to stand up to Trump when he has 25,000 U.S. troops inside his country.
Well, that problem's always been there. It's a sore issue. The problem of American troops in South Korea. What are they doing there? Are they actually there to help South Korean democracy, or are they there to escalate tension? And I think that is a thing that kind of has a double-edged attitude towards that among South Koreans. And because what Trump's been doing and saying every few weeks in general have been surprising, but towards South Korea has really been a surprise because generally that sort of language would be reserved for North Korea. But what was happening recently, right before the election, was that one after another insults towards South Korea came. So it is it's really, that's the element that we don't really know what to expect, because we know what to expect with North Korea.
Finally, Suki, as we wrap up, you spend time both in South Korea and also here in the U.S. What's it like to observe the way the Koreas are covered here in the U.S. As someone who is from there and knows the country very well? Living here in the U.S., how do you observe the discourse about North Korea and South Korea in the United States?
I think in the United States, generally, obviously, about North Korea, the dialogue is incredibly misleading and often misinformed. That's because North Korea is a difficult subject. It's a country I went undercover in and covered extensively. So I think that America simply does not understand North Korea at all. When it comes to South Korea, I think that we are a lot clearer what the dynamic is between North and South. But sure, one of the fundamental issues, I would tell you, if you ask average Americans, what do you think about the troops in South Korea? Why is there any anti-American sentiment possibly from South Korea towards the United States at some point? There have been in the past. Nobody would really be able to answer that. Like, what are they doing in South Korea? The troops that's been there since 1953. I think that dialogue where actually America was responsible, along with the allies, the division of Korea is a dialogue that America simply doesn't, it chose to forget that detail entirely. It only talks about going to Korea to help them fight for democracy, never talks about actually dividing the country. It happened back in 1945. So I think that there is a lot of hypocrisy in discussion with South Korea. However, it is an ally. And I think that, why Trump has been saying all these things towards South Korea that has been so negative in the past month, I think it is something that we do kind of have to try to look at, because the relationship US has with North Korea, which is a very, very scary one because North Korea is a nuclear country. And the country that really has to kind of negotiate that very difficult dynamic between the United States and North Korea is actually South Korea. So the relationship that America has to have with North and South are both incredibly important. I don't think we really understand that in America.
Suki Kim, author and journalist, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.